Well, hello to everyone who has joined us today in LA, New York, Amsterdam, Monte Carlo, Chardin, and all over the world. It is time to tell you what I've just heard regarding this month's threats to your industry, the internet, and identity. My name is Jeff Bartow, and I am a trust strategist here at DigiCert. And normally, I'm joined by my partner and peer, Angelique Pereira, who is hours away from enjoying a much-deserved week off plus on holiday. So I'm giving her those additional hours of vacation by DJing this dance party today alone. Now, as the nominal producers and hosts of this briefing, we'd like to thank you for taking time in your day to join your colleagues in attendance who are participating alongside you. Now, you know better than the simple-minded view of digital certificates, which consists of a commodity certificate which lets you encrypt data. Now, there's obviously more value to be gained than from just cheap encryption. It's about confirming identity and managing risk and achieving visibility and agility and security. And all of these things are stuff that your organization needs to ensure business continuity and protect your brand and your employees and your customers and constituents. They all count upon your organization and you to be trustworthy, and therefore we honor your trust in us with our solemn responsibility to either lead positive change or be at the very heart of it. In turn, this helps you project fundamental trust on this very threat-filled internet. Hence, we offer this briefing to you free of charge to fulfill our role of leadership, and we are so glad that you are in it with us. To make sure that you are full partners with us in this briefing too, let's take care of some housekeeping here. First, if you have any questions as we go along, please do submit them in the very moment that you think them up. And the same goes for any feedback or ratings that you wish to offer. We can address them after the briefing is concluded. And of course, anything that you submit will help us consistently improve our communications with you, because we're kind of into that. Second, please continue this conversation with your account managers and security specialists and everyone else here working to support you across our organizations. Look, if you don't have the contact information handy to keep the conversation going, we will supply details at the end of this briefing. So please stay around for that. Now, third, this briefing is being recorded, and that allows you to refer back to it later, or better yet, to share it with your colleagues who couldn't join us right now. And then finally, out of respect for everybody in the audience today, we understand that English may not be your first language. So I hope that this welcome and housekeeping has allowed you the time to get accustomed to my voice and my pacing and my silly California accent. Now, we're going to look at the agenda for today's briefing, which covers all the news to date in this month of August. Our agenda gives you a standard topic sequence that you can rely on each month. And depending on your role and your needs, you can use this sequence to know exactly when on the agenda to actively listen versus when to multitask. Let's be diplomatic there. First, we're going to cover the month's news in SSL and TLS, and this will be followed by the news in the IoT and PKI world. We do take a cross-section of these in the securely topic, and as you can tell by the multiple monetary unit characters in that section's name, no, we didn't accidentally mistype that, securely focuses on the costs to maintain security and encryption and identity, or more commonly, the cost of not maintaining it. Now, of course, there's pertinent news which transcends beyond SSL and TLS and PKI and the IoT, and we've got a topic for that, and we've named it by leveraging an industry term, and we call it hash. Then we end on fun and positive notes by covering both the strange news and the good news, respectively. So let's begin with what is happening this month in SSL and TLS, and we have a lot of news this month, by the way. So pardon if I don't break pace here. First up, according to research from Panarrays, maintaining support for TLS 1.0 will put over half of surveyed organizations outside of PCI DSS compliance. And for those of you who don't know the jumble of the acronym there, that is the Payment Card Industry's Data Security Standard. Specifically, this research revealed that 52% of surveyed organizations use TLS 1.0 on every website they operate, and that's almost 30,000 sites among the 1,150 organizations which they surveyed. And even when TLS 1.0 isn't used on every site, 45% use 1.0 on at least one site. The problem with this is that the PCI DSS requires organizations to replace TLS 1.0 with TLS 1.1 or 1.2, since 1.0 has been shown to be more vulnerable to man-in-the-middle and other attacks than the newer versions. And by the way, yes, we will talk about 1.3 in just a bit. It is speculated that companies keep using 1.0 on their websites because they perceive the need to support old browsers and applications which don't support the newer versions of TLS. We've heard this story over and over through the years, just different topics. Now, there's also a suspected lack of awareness among organizations about the details of PCI DSS compliance requirements. And trust me, if you take payment of any kind, which involves a card, credit card, payment card, cash card, debit card, check card, whatever you may call it, you're going to want to pay attention to the PCI DSS. Second up, researchers have shown how it's possible to recover a 2048-bit RSA key from OpenSSL using smartphone processor radio emissions. This is kind of strange, but it does belong in this section because it's not strange enough to go in the news of the strange, which comes later. The team from Georgia Tech managed to recover the key in a single pass using an EDIS USRP B200 mini receiver that cost just $1,000. That's US dollars. The researchers said that this is the first attack to crack OpenSSL without exploiting cache timing or organization. The good news, however, is that the attack only works on OpenSSL 1.0 G, which has been updated since it was released back in November of last year. The team captured the key from radio noise from a Samsung Galaxy phone, an Alcatel Ideal phone, and an A13O Linuxino single-board computer. The research team has written a paper describing their findings as well as mitigation steps. They also plan on presenting their findings at the Usenix Security 2018 conference. Now, I mentioned I would bring it up, and here we are about TLS 1.3. On August 10th, the IETF, the Internet Engineering Task Force, published RFC 8446, and that kind of made TLS 1.3 for reals. Now, after working with the IETF, Facebook recently open-sourced its Fizz library for the TLS, or Transport Layer Security Protocol, under the BSD license in an effort to move towards wider deployment of 1.3. Good on you, Facebook. Now, while Facebook says that, quote, more than 50% of our internet traffic is secured with TLS 1.3, and that will continue to grow as browsers and apps add support for TLS 1.3, unquote, some companies have avoided 1.3 because network security appliance vendors made it impossible to update their firmware. Fizz overcomes this by making the first parts of the TLS 1.3 handshake look like the 1.2 resumption handshake. So with this approach, TLS became pretty reliably deployable with no fallback to TLS 1.2. Quite clever. Facebook touts Fizz as a robust, highly performant, I love that word, performant, a robust, highly performant TLS library, which offers an improved solution for middle-box handshake failures, supports asynchronous I/O by default, and can handle scatter-gather I/O to eliminate the need for extra copies of data. In addition, Facebook says that Fizz reduces latency when establishing secure connections, always a good thing, and it reduces memory and CPU uses to provide almost a 10% higher throughput than the previous stack as compared to using load balancer synthetic benchmarks. Now, hopefully, moves like this open sourcing of Fizz, Google's recent moves to uniformly warn when HTTP is used, and the IETF's RFC 8446 I mentioned earlier, will go far towards adoption of TLS 1.3 as the gig and the internet standard. Okay, we are over halfway there through the SSL and TLS news. One of the United States senators from Oregon, Mr. Ron Wyden, has been a champion of improving the country's cybersecurity, and reportedly calls out government officials for not implementing the widely available security technologies that they've not yet rolled out due to inertia. So in May of this year, Mr. Wyden sent a letter to the CIO of the United States Department of Defense, reminding them, gently, of a 2015 directive to implement HTTPS and HSTS on government websites by the end of 2016. That directive was doubled down by the Department of Homeland Security, we call it the DHS, binding directive in 2017. Doesn't sound like it's too binding. However, pointing out that many websites of the 5 U.S. Armed Services, plus the website of the DoD's CIO itself, to whom he wrote the letter, quote, either do not secure connections with encryption or only prove their authenticity with a certificate issued by the DoD Root Certificate Authority, unquote. The senator went on in a brief written lecture, which included a reference to Google Chrome's unavoidable not secure rating for a website which doesn't use SSL or TLS. And by the way, if you're scratching your head about why is this important that they're using the DoD Root Certificate Authority, that CA is not a publicly trusted root certificate. And as a result, DoD employees and warriors that work for the Department of Defense often must do the exact thing that CIOs don't want happening. And that's particularly in a secretive and military environment, and that is to ignore security warnings, because that's what happens when a root isn't trusted. So the Pentagon CIO replied to the letter in late July, explaining that HTTPS and HSTS are works in progress and priorities, and they expect full HTTPS implementation by the end of this year. 2016, but I guess they're rounding up. And they expect an end-of-year due date also for the DoD's HSTS implementation plan. Okay, now, second from last in this long list of SSL and TLS news this month, the Secretariat, we're switching countries here, the Secretariat of the Treasury Board of Canada has joined the United States and the United Kingdom in requiring that government websites use HTTPS. And obviously that invokes the use of SSL or TLS. At the end of June, Canada's Treasury Board issued an Information Technology Policy Implementation Notice, or an ITPIN. It's a lot easier to say. And it directs certain departments to implement HTTPS for web connections. The ITPIN applies to all departments which are subject to their Policy on Management of Information Technology, and that includes the Canadian offices of the Auditor General, the Chief Electoral Officer, the Commissioner of Lobbying, the Commissioner of Official Languages, the Public Sector Integrity Commissioner, and the Information and Privacy Commissioners. However, the ITPIN additionally encourages, quote, departments, agencies, and organizations in the Government of Canada not subject to the Policy on Management of Information Technology to abide by this ITPIN. What a great recommendation, unquote. The particulars of the notice detail that all publicly accessible government websites and web services belonging to those departments are to redirect from HTTP to HTTPS, be enabled with HSTS, be configured for TLS 1.2 or later, yay, disabled for SSL versions 2 and 3, as well as TLS 1.0 and 1.1, yay, and disabled for known weak ciphers such as RC4 and 3DES. Isn't it interesting how all of these stories start to merge together? Now, batting cleanup in this whole list here, our final news story, sensitive information about a company's activity and employees and clients can be collected by hackers taking advantage of abandoned domain names, according to security researcher Gabor Safmari. He found that he could use domain names that were no longer in use by organizations to retrieve sensitive information that could be used to carry out a range of actions. Once a domain name expires, companies typically have 30 days to reclaim it, and after that, it becomes available for purchase. Safmari got his hands on 6 abandoned domain names, several of which used to belong to Australian legal practices. So once he had ownership of these domains, Safmari then had control of the whole flow of email into these old domains, which included all the messages intended for the former businesses. Now, remember, most of these sites, or notable sites of these 6 that he bought, were law firms. In all, Safmari gathered more than 25,000 messages, and while most of them were spam, he still managed to obtain reports and statements and notifications, newsletters meant for employees. Now, while this information alone is cause for concern, the working email addresses can also be used to initiate password resets for many online services that the employees had set up using their work email addresses. Safmari found that some of the email addresses he now had control of were used to sign up for Twitter and Facebook and LinkedIn accounts. Safmari recommends several preventative measures that could protect businesses from this type of attack, including making sure domains are valid for an indefinite period, even after they're no longer in use. Also closing or dissociating all accounts that use business email addresses, and of course using two-factor authentication to protect against account takeover. Now, you might be wondering why this news story is being covered in the SSL and TLS section, and the reason for it is that second, and it's often the most overlooked function of SSL and TLS certificates, and that's the validation function. Organization-validated and extended validation certificates, we call them OV and EV certificates in the industry. OV and EV uniquely will demonstrate to site visitors that the web address they're visiting really belongs to the organization that they think it is, and that the organization is actually legitimate. No other certificate can do that, and especially those free domain-validated certificates, or DV certificates. The lesson here is pretty simple and straightforward. When you set up your websites to be protected by OV or EV certificates and do all you can to project trust, like I said in the beginning, you set the expectation that any site lacking those trust indicators isn't you and is not legitimate. And that, my friends, is a definite lesson in the idea of being known by the company you keep. Okay, so we're going to move onward, and we're going to switch gears into the month in PKI and IoT news. And thankfully, we don't have 6 stories here. We do have 3. Now, first up, security vendor Tripwire's recent State of Cyber Hygiene report revealed some surprising findings, particularly around how many of the surveyed organizations still struggle to maintain visibility of their environments and quickly address unauthorized potential issues. Specifically, attackers only need minutes on a network to launch a successful attack. However, 57% of surveyed organizations admitted that it takes them hours, weeks, or months or longer to detect new devices connecting to their organization's network. And that includes both devices related to the prosecution of business, but also questionable or unrelated devices like those which are permitted under BYOD policies these days. If any of those devices or their users have malicious intent, 27% of surveyed organizations said that it takes anywhere from a month or more to more than 1 year to deploy a security patch. Frightening. Now, every month you hear us cover news which demonstrates that IoT devices are not terribly hard to hack because they often ship with little or no security, which enables attackers to gain access to them thanks to default username password combinations, or easy-to-guess passwords, or simply no user authentication in place at all. So it's welcome news that an alert from the United States Federal Bureau of Investigation, we call it the FBI, claims that IoT devices, particularly routers and IP cameras and even smart locks and connected doors, we've covered all this in previous briefings, are being targeted for anonymous exploit by cybercriminals who seek gateways for hacking and other cyber attacks. The anonymity aspect is quite useful for hackers outside the USA who can use these hijacked devices to hide not just the source of the attacks, but the evidence of the attacks. Now, according to the FBI's alert, quote, devices in developed nations are particularly attractive targets because they allow access to many business websites that block traffic from suspicious or foreign IP addresses. Continuing the quote here, cyber actors use the compromised device's IP address to engage in intrusion activities, making it difficult to filter regular traffic from malicious traffic, unquote. The FBI makes some specific recommendations such as regularly rebooting smart products because, quote, most malware is stored in memory and removed upon a device reboot, unquote. Remember, we saw that last month about certain routers. The FBI also urges users to change default usernames and passwords, to ensure patches are applied when issued, and if necessary, to keep connected devices on a segmented network if possible. Now, across the pond, the UK government is looking into security rules for IoT products, while ENISA, the European Union Cybersecurity Agency, is also working towards legislation around securing the IoT. We are so, this sounds like that the FBI has issued this, and it's kind of like, oh, no kidding, we all know that. On the other hand, there's a lot of times when people are kind of pressing snooze on a problem, and it's good to have it surfaced, especially by an official government agency whose job is to investigate crime. Now, last up here, a recently discovered IoT botnet known as Hide and Seek has broadened its range of targets and is now attempting to infect home automation system. Hide and Seek was first discovered in January by security firm Bitdefender, and it initially targeted routers and IP cameras. By May, it was estimated to have infected more than 90,000 devices, and according to recent research from Fortinet, Hide and Seek is now targeting home automation systems, in addition to cross-platform database solutions. It has observed the botnet attempting to infect Homematic Zentral CCU2 devices. Homematic is a brand of smart home devices created by the German manufacturer EQ3. The Homematic Zentral handles control, monitoring, and configuration of other Homematic devices. Okay, so that wraps it up for this month's news of the PKI and IoT. We're going to take that cross-section I mentioned earlier and talk about the monetary side of things. First up, according to Risk IQ, every minute that goes by sees 5,518 records leaked from publicly disclosed incidents, helping rack up a corresponding per-minute cost of $1.1 million. Their report, named, quote, Evil Internet Minute, unquote, was based on compiled proprietary and third-party research used then to crunch numbers around malicious activity. Now, while obviously these numbers average across minutes and hours and days and months and so forth, the report also revealed that when a large global business is affected by cyber attacks, its average cost to do so is just $222 a minute. You'll understand why I said just. While you might wince at that number, it is even more painful to realize that businesses are spending $171,000 every minute on defending against cyber attacks. According to Jonathan Kleinsma, the head threat researcher at Risk IQ, quote, cybercrime on the web is growing. Attackers are learning that when they target internet-exposed assets, their campaigns have a high degree of success. Attacks like malvertising and phishing and supply chain breaches and hacking unsecured servers are lucrative, unquote. Now, next up, according to a recent study by Positive Technologies, major cyber incidents have increased by 32% in the year that's elapsed between Q1 2017 and Q1 2018. They attribute that rise in attacks to ready-made malware, which is available off the shelf, so to speak, on the dark web. And the pricing in this inventory of hacks for sale is pretty surprising. After looking at 25 dark web sites to examine the cost of cybercrime services, here's what they found. And some of these are pretty shockingly low. All of these are in US dollars. Now, to hack an email system will cost you just $40. And a website hack will cost only $150. Infecting a site or a file with injected ransomware Trojans runs about $750, and a targeted attack can be launched for about $4,500. Now, considering that it takes just $40 to infiltrate a business's email system, it is not hard to move onward and steal sensitive information. And since costs are so low, hackers could launch multiple attacks at once, or alternately, they can purchase multiple attack services in order to target large enterprises from different angles and keep the IT and security staff as busy as possible. If hackers can't afford the larger, more dangerous attacks, they could still do damage with a slew of smaller attacks. Okay, so out of 4, almost there. Stay on target. According to an IBM-sponsored report by the Ponemon Institute, the average global-scale data breach comes at an all-told cost each of $3.86 million US dollars. However, that same report also documented that the cost could be $1 million lower if the organization discovers the breach within 30 days of its occurrence. The research also found that breached organizations were able to slice that average cost down by nearly $1.5 million if they employed auditing and logging tools, which leverage artificial intelligence and machine learning and other automated structures. Auditing and logging network traffic, internet access, file transfers, user activity, permission changes, and a myriad other day-to-day activities is the first line of defense in establishing integrity for mission-critical system. But a framework for monitoring and reviewing those events would likely pay off quickly in the event of a breach, because they allow the organization to act quickly. And as we've seen, a quick response yields lower costs too. So in these days of the breach du jour, as we like to call it, attacks and compromise seem pretty much inevitable. Having a strategic plan to audit for that impending security breach and respond to it quickly and decisively could be the only thing that separates a successful enterprise from a failing one these days. Now, last up, malware specifically targeting the 3,500 cryptocurrency ATMs around the world is now for sale on the dark web, and it's not cheap. According to researchers from Trend Micro, a dark web-based veteran of malware creation has offered his experience and successes to exploit vulnerabilities in cryptocurrency ATMs for the price of $25,000. The price is pretty high enough to prevent a profusion of small-time hackers looking to make a quick buck, or whatever its equivalent is in cryptocurrency. The developer says that the malware exploits a service vulnerability which enables the purchasers who implement it to receive Bitcoin worth up to $6,750, and that's in dollars, pounds, or euros, however you measure it. At least that's according to this developer's quote. These next generation ATMs don't connect to bank accounts like current ATMs do. Instead, they connect to cryptocurrency exchanges and a user's digital wallet. To withdraw or transfer cryptocurrency, a Bitcoin ATM user will provide his or her mobile number and ID card to verify his or her identity, and then once verified, inputs a wallet address or scans a QR code in order to make a transfer. But this is apparently just the beginning. The number of cryptocurrency ATMs has seen almost a 5 times growth, and that's in last year alone. This is leading Trend Micro to predict, quote, as the number of Bitcoin ATMs grows, we can expect to see more forms of malware targeting cryptocurrency ATMs in the future, unquote. All right, with that, we are going to move on to our kitchen sink section, which we call Hash, and there's a few news items here. First up, this month in our kitchen sink, Carrero Network Security has revealed in a recent study that the most damaging consequence of a DDoS attack, that is a distributed denial of service attack for a business is the erosion of customer trust and confidence. Anybody who's in the audience of a webinar or presentation or interview or call where either Angelique or I have spoken will recognize what I'm about to say here. The more a consumer trusts an organization's site or a document or an app, the more profitable it is for that organization. Now, we call it the transitive property of trust, and it's at the heart of this study from Carrero. They surveyed IT professionals, IT security professionals at this year's InfoSecurity Europe, and well over a third of respondents, that's 42% to be exact, stated that loss of customer trust and confidence were the worst effect of suffering a DDoS attack. Now, this is in comparison to 26% of respondents claiming that citing data theft was the most damaging result. Quote, networking and web services availability are crucial to ensuring customer satisfaction and sustaining customer trust and confidence in a brand, unquote. And this is according to Ashley Stevenson, the CEO at Carrero. And it's very interesting how she links customers and brands, trust, and confidence, which we usually view as IT and security products all together here. Quoting her again, these indicators are vital to both the retention and acquisition of customers in highly competitive markets. When an end user is denied access to internet-facing applications or network outages degrade their experience, it immediately impacts brand reputation. Hey, marketing people, go talk to your IT people and security people and vice versa. That's not a part of her quote, of course. Next up, Reddit confirmed that a hacker compromised its systems between June 14th and June 18th and was able to make away with email addresses and account passwords. The company detected the incident on June 19. Quote, we learned that an attacker compromised a few of Reddit's accounts with cloud and source code hosting providers by intercepting SMS two-factor authentication verification codes. And this is according to a Reddit spokesperson who did not say how many users were impacted. The hacker was able to access all Reddit data from 2007 and before, including account credentials and email addresses via 2007 database backup containing an old salted and hashed passwords. The hacker also accessed logs containing email digests sent by Reddit between June 3 and June 17, 2018. The digests connect a username to the associated email address. Now, the spokesperson at Reddit continued, quote, we are working with federal law enforcement and have also taken measures to both address this current situation and prevent similar incidents in the future, unquote. Now, those measures notably would include requiring token-based two-factor authentication to gain entry. Quote, we learned that SMS-based authentication is not nearly as secure as we would hope. We point this out to encourage everyone here to move to token-based two-factor authentication, unquote. Now, finally, in our hash news today, a malware author, he or she calls himself Elite Lands, is in the process of building a botnet using unpatched AV Tech devices. The botnet, which the malware author has called Death, is targeting 14-year-old vulnerabilities in firmware shared by multiple AV Tech devices such as DVRs, NVRs, and IP cameras. The exploit Elite Lands is using was first published back in 2016, and AV Tech issued patches for the flaws back in 2017. However, there's still many devices that haven't applied the fixes. The vulnerable firmware exposes device passwords in plain text and allows an unauthenticated attacker to add additional users. Another flaw present on older AV Tech devices makes the device read passwords as shell commands. This allows an attacker to take over vulnerable devices. It is unclear how large the Death botnet currently is. The malware author said that his botnet was originally intended for DDoS attacks, but that he will, quote, have a greater plan for it soon, unquote. Rather spooky, especially with something named Death. Okay, so now it's time. We're going to move on to my absolute favorite section of every briefing, and that is Stranger Than Fiction. This is the news that kind of makes you go, Now, first in our list of head scratchers, last week, the Democratic National Committee here in the United States rang the alarm bell pretty loudly that it was the target of a phishing campaign in process, judging by an observed fake login page for Vote Builder, and that is effectively the DNC's voter database. The DNC's CSO briefed party leaders and informed the FBI and even took a swipe at the Trump administration for not doing enough to protect voting infrastructure. And then it was discovered that it was actually a phishing campaign indeed, but specifically a phishing awareness exercise. Now, while it's true that you can't be sure whether an alarm is false or not until you investigate it, the notifications and blaming were premature. And according to U.S.-based news service CNN, it was, quote, a snafu, unquote. That's an acronym, by the way. In the time since the alarm bells were called off, it's been revealed that the whole matter was a test organized by the Michigan Democratic Party, who tasked the white hat hacking volunteer group known as DigiDems to do penetration testing of Vote Builder, which they certainly did, but they just forgot to notify the mothership at the DNC. Okay, second up in the news of the weird, several state and local government agencies in the U.S. have reported receiving snail mail, in which malware-laden compact discs, remember CDs, are enclosed. The mail was apparently sent from China, and for those of you old enough, not from AOL. It seems that this old-school method is effective because it preys on the curiosity of recipients who may be enticed into loading this CD into a PC, because when's the last time you did that? Of course, this assumes they have PCs with CD-ROM drives handy. And that said, it's not clear if any of these CDs made it onto a government computer anyway. Regardless, the payload arrives in a Chinese postmarked envelope and includes a, quote, confusingly worded typed letter with occasional Chinese characters, unquote, according to a non-public alert shared with state and local government agencies by the Multi-State Information Sharing and Analysis Center, or the MSISAC. We've mentioned them in previous briefings. In further detail, it revealed that the CDs contain Mandarin language Microsoft Word .doc files, which include malicious Visual Basic scripts. It's interesting as we go through these are all things that we've talked about in previous briefings. I have to say, with the exception of the snail mail and the CD one. That's I would like to say a new twist, but it's certainly an old twist. Okay, next up, a senior citizen couple just on the edges of Silicon Valley here got an unpleasant surprise when they woke up in the middle of the night and found a masked intruder in their bedroom. Now, inexplicably, the intruder said he wanted to use the couple's Wi-Fi network and that he was, quote, out of data. You can't make this up. One of the two residents heroically leapt out of bed, confronted the man, then physically ejected him out of the residence. The couple immediately called the police, who arrested this troublemaker just minutes later. Because the suspect is 17 years old, police wouldn't provide the perp's name, but he was arrested for burglary, which is a felony here in California, as well as misdemeanor charges of prowling. The accused burglar was also charged with providing false information, specifically about his identity, to a police officer. Now, remarkably, this wasn't the suspect's only bizarre attempt to get Wi-Fi access that weekend. According to police, just the night before, the same young man was found prowling outside another Palo Alto home. When the house's residents came out and confronted him, he, quote, asked to use their Wi-Fi network because he was out of data, unquote. Now, those residents told him to beat it, and he did. He scrambled on a bike that he stole from their backyard. Now, police were able to recover the bike from the suspect following the second burglary, and he may face an additional charge for stealing the bike. He's got more problems than being out of data, that's for sure. Now, next up, this reminds me of the many times I've slipped into the driver's seat of a rental car and paired my mobile phone to the vehicle, only to find sometimes a long list of previously paired mobile phone names, some of them which included names or phone numbers. Okay, so in this story, a security researcher has highlighted weaknesses in the protocols and tech in connected cars that could leave previous owners with access to the car's location data, as well as the ability to lock and unlock the car and control its heating system. Matt Watts, he is a techie blogger. He blogged about the issues when he experienced when he purchased a secondhand Jaguar Land Rover. Watts downloaded the JLR app so he can control the various connected features of the car, but when he tried to link his car to his account, he was told it was already linked to an account. The previous owners of the car still had access to the car's trip data, the ability to call out breakdown services, and more. Having investigated the issue and contacted various people, Watts eventually was told that he should track down the former owner and ask them to disconnect their account from the vehicle. JLR says that if a car is sold on by a registered JLR dealer, the dealer will ensure that the previous owner has unbound their account from their car, but that doesn't seem to be the process if you're doing this if it's an independent dealer. In other words, if you're selling it yourself. It advises new owners who find their car is still bound to a previous owner to visit a JLR dealer, or if you don't have a JLR, the dealer itself, to have the account reset. But there doesn't seem to be any way for it to be reset at the manufacturer level. I seem to remember shades of this from the IoT and PKI section. Okay, last but not least, we covered Amazon's controversial face recognition technology a couple months ago, and it's causing concern yet again after it erroneously flagged 28 United States congressmen as criminals. No judgment here. In a test carried out by the American Civil Liberties Union, or the ACLU, Amazon's recognition program, that's recognition with a K instead of a C, its program was used to compare 2,500 criminal mugshots to members of Congress, and it found 28 matches. Many of the politicians were understandably concerned. Jimmy Gomez, who's a Democrat from California, tweeted, quote, "I am outraged and worried by the impact this tool will have on hashtag communities of color when put in the hands of law enforcement, exclamation point." And then he pointed at Jeff Bezos, "We need to talk ASAP." Unquote, and end of tweet. However, in the response to the ACLU's findings, Amazon has hit back and said its technology was incorrectly used by the advocacy group. Amazon claims that the ACLU used the software with its default 80% confidence threshold setting, and that it should have been throttled up to 95%, which is the setting that Amazon says it recommends for law enforcement. Quote, "While 80% confidence is an acceptable threshold for photos of hot dogs," I love the Silicon Valley reference there, "is an acceptable threshold for photos of hot dogs, chairs, animals, or other social media use cases, it wouldn't be appropriate for identifying individuals with a reasonable level of certainty," unquote. This is according to Amazon. However, ACLU Attorney Jacob Snow highlighted that, quote, "Amazon makes no effort to ask users what they are using recognition for," unquote. Well, tit for tat here. Following the test carried out by the ACLU, 5 congressmen have written a letter to Amazon CEO Jeff Bezos questioning the facial recognition technology. Of course, we're not sure if those 5 were any of the ones that were accidentally fingered by the recognition software. Now, I regret that ends the stranger than fiction category, but we are moving onward towards our last section of this month. And for our vacationing Angelique, this is her favorite section. According to a report by the Reuters Institute, the average number of third-party cookies used on EU-based websites based in the European Union, have dropped by 22% since the GDPR legislation came into force at the end of May this year. The data compared readings taken from April and July, which seems to show that GDPR has a significant impact on the use of such cookies on websites, or at least a change in tact by website owners. Web users could not have failed to notice the endless barrage of cookie consent requests that sprang up all over on websites we all visit, and these notices have become a requirement in the post-GDPR world. The researchers conducted this research by counting the number of cookies set by simply visiting the website before any consent is given or interaction takes place. They noted that the drop in the number of cookies measured was down to two factors. One is that the initial number of cookies set when a user first hits the site may be lower because they've not yet given consent for use of third-party cookies. The number of cookies after consent is received may actually be the same, or could actually be higher. Now, the second potential factor is that works to be compliant with GDPR legislation may not have prompted websites to reevaluate the number of third-party content providers used on their site. Now, in this regard, the use of social media-related cookies showed an 8% drop, which would suggest a reduction in the use of social media content. Recent social media privacy scandals and the resulting backlash may potentially have contributed to this decline also. Now, in news that both security practitioners and salespeople will love, Gartner has published its worldwide forecast for security spending, showing sunny days ahead for the sector. It estimates that the total market spend will grow by around 12% in 2018, and then another 8% in 2019. Now, in U.S. dollar terms, that's growing from $101.5 million up to $114 million, and then onward to $124 million, and this is in 2019. According to Gartner's analysis, the main drivers for the growth will be security risks, business needs, and industry changes. With regulations like GDPR now in place and an increasing public awareness of privacy issues, this is, of course, stoked by recent scandals such as the Facebook Cambridge Analytica fiasco. These events have helped shove the question of privacy higher up the list of priorities for organizations that collect or process personal data. Let's face it, that's virtually all organizations of any significant size. Now, looking closer at the subcategories of spending, it seems that cloud security will be the biggest gainer in terms of growth. It's expected to grow 64% this year and then a further 50% in 2019. But the segment is much smaller in dollar amounts compared with the others. Most of the other segments are expected to grow at a more modest rate in the lower double-digit range. Nevertheless, it is double-digit. Now, last but not least, 36 out of 50 U.S. states have now adopted new technology that will help the federal government monitor for evidence of interference in computers used to run elections. The 36 states have rolled out Albert sensors. This is hardware developed by the Center for Internet Security, which is a nonprofit organization. At this stage, 74 separate sensors have been installed across 38 counties and other local government offices, and only 14 sensors were installed prior to the 2016 U.S. presidential election. Of course, that one saw Russian-backed hackers breach voter registration databases in Illinois and Arizona. Now, of the 14 states that do not have a sensor installed, some are opting for alternative solutions, while others are refusing the offer because of concerns about federal government overreach. And that wraps up our good news, and in fact, all of our news for this month. However, that means only this part of the briefing is over. In the words of Dennis DeYoung, don't let it end this way. First, if you have not posted a question or suggestion or rating, I ask that you please do so right now. And I mean now. Hop to it. Because after all, we do all we can to keep the news and the conversation fresh here. And your part of that equation is to supply the feedback. This will, of course, guide our subsequent briefings toward what you want to hear. Of course, you reap the rewards of all of that because it helps us in turn provide maximum value in the next briefing in this long-running series, which we usually hold on the last Thursday of each and every month. Now, second, please keep this conversation going both ways. Before next month's briefing, we've got all manner of people here who are eager to serve you, including your account manager and our SEs and our customer success specialists and all the others supporting you across our sales and marketing and product organizations. That's what you get when you're the leader in this field. And this is what you get, what you're paying for. The more, the merrier in this conversation. So please do include your colleagues and peers in that conversation. And that conversation continues with a simple phone call. Now, of course, if you don't have your direct contact phone number with you handy, just use the phone numbers that are listed here on this page. We will connect you to the right people. We are here to serve you, of course, and we do appreciate your business. Now, finally, we warmly welcome you to share this briefing with your peers and your direct reports and your management, your friends, your dog catcher, and your local dentist. Anybody, frankly, who couldn't attend but would benefit from it. And you can do that by simply sharing the link to this briefing, but also, or instead, you can go download the slides. I see a couple of you have already done that. And also the source links for all the news that we've covered. And we put those out there not only to validate what we cover, but also in case you want to see where the news is actually happening. It's pretty consistent each month. Which organizations cover the news in our industry. Now, you can do any of that downloading or whatever at any time you want. We hope you do so sooner than later, because the time to secure your environment and establish fundamental trust on the internet is right now. Now, with that, I want to thank you again for your time and your participation in today's briefing. On behalf of my co-host and my cohort, Angelique, and equally on behalf of DigiCert, the leader in digital certificate solutions for encryption and identity, goodbye, good day, and please stay safe online.